Good evening, everyone. I don't want to bore you, but a lot of you actually probably haven't heard of me. I had my own independent shop, Skyline Custom. I ran that for 36 years. I was 20 when I opened it. And back then in the 60s, I liked to do naturally like any 20-year-old kid. I liked to build custom cars, hot rods, what have you. I would do cars of my own, and I would put them in Autorama at Cobo Hall in Detroit. And during that time, I met a gentleman that put on the car shows, Bob Larrabee. He put on, probably 50, 60 car shows a year all over the country. And during this time, he was noticing naturally the cars that I would bring to the show and what they look like and the quality and what have you. So he asked me if I would do some repairs on some of the cars that they would lease as feature cars from all over the country. Barris would have some, or Ed Roth, people like that, and they would use them for feature cars. But during this time, during the shows, through the weeks, months, whatever, they would maybe get a scratch or a dent or what have you. He would run them over to me real quick, got to get them back in the show, so I would repair them and send them back on the road for him. And in '68, I decided I wanted to build something different of my own for Autorama. And what they have, if you're familiar with Autorama at Cobo Hall, they have what's called the Riddler Award. And that is an award that is for the best car, first time ever shown. So I figured, well, what the heck, I'll try my best and do that. So for that show in '68, I built a kind of a C-cab type hot rod, and it was called the Fire Truck, or Engine Company 13. 13 came from the address of my shop, so I figured, well, let me go with that, and a fire truck. It went over so good at Cobo Hall that it won the Riddler Award, and I was the 5th winner of the award for that year, or, since they started it, and that was in '68. After that, MPC approached me about building the model car of it. So they built the model car of mine in '68. So during this time, Larrabee, he saw what, I guess you could say, my qualities, what have you. So he asked me if I would do a job for him, build a car. I said, sure. Well, he used to do advance work to go to different cities that car shows were coming up. It could be Kansas City or Chicago, what have you. And he was in Chicago doing advance work for his show. And there was a car show or a toy show going on during this time. So he went to the toy show just, for the heck of it and see what kind of new models there were. So he went there and he saw one that really caught his eye, and he got the kit, brought it back to me, asked me if I could build it. And that was the Red Baron. I don't know if you're familiar with it as kids, whatever, building model cars. If you're not, it was a T-bucket style body with a big German helmet for a roof, if you remember that one. So anyways, he asked me if I could build that for him, and naturally I could build that. Not knowing, but anyways, we did, built that car in '69. But during this time, Don Morton, Dave Landreth, they were the head guys at Hurst Performance. And naturally, they would go to all the car shows all over and look at this, look at that. And they asked me if I'd be interested in doing some work for them. I said, well, sure I would. Okay, well, then kind of that was it for a while. But then we go back to Bob Larrabee. He came back to me wanting something else built. And I don't know if you're familiar with what they call the Zingers. They were half-scale cars, Volkswagen Corvette, Dodge van, and they were half-scale with full-size engines in them. The engines were gutted, no guts in them at all. They didn't run. They were just for show. They were very expensive engine stands, basically. So they had them all over the country. I built 4 of those cars for him. Steve Tansey built the dune buggy and the dragster for him. I built the Volkswagen, the Vet, the van, and the semi. Then after that, Chrysler approached me too. I built the Sonic Cuda, if you're familiar with that. RTS, Rapid Transit System. Chrysler. They approached me about doing cars for them, and I did the Barracuda and the Roadrunner. The Roadrunner just sold at the Mecum auction just a month ago, 2 months ago. Gentleman that owned it, he passed, and they sold his collection, Steve Giuliano, and that just sold at Mecum. So anyways, then back to Don, Morton, and Dave Landreth. When they approached me, they asked me if I could do a job, and I said sure. So they came to me with drawings of the Rambler Scrambler, if you're familiar with that. 69 Rambler. Red, white, blue, big hood scoop on it and all of that. So we built that car. They took it to American Motors and they looked at it and they liked it, but they just said some of the stuff they couldn't go for. It had a stripe through the back window, similar to the Olds. So they axed a couple things and they didn't go for this or that, but eventually they went for the whole car and they did production on those. Then they came to me with this car here, the Hurst Olds. The car was originally, as well as the Rambler, it was designed by a gentleman in Detroit, Gene Baker, from which he did a lot of buildings, architectural stuff, but sideline, he liked to do cars. So he designed the Rambler and this one. Gene, he's a different individual. He was kind of out there on some of his ideas with the lettering and all of this. So anyways, when Dave and Don approached me about it, here's the drawings. Can we build it? Okay, sure. So we started on just different things, the hood scoop and what we called was the elephant tusk spoilers in the back. And just like Don will tell you too, we knew GM wouldn't go for it. One thing, it's too wide in the back. And then you figure packaging all of the parts. You're going to have to warehouse them for how many years? Doing a car like that in a semi-production, that's going to be costly. And GM, they just figured, we can't go for that. Plus, when an outside vendor, if you will, designs something, that doesn't make GM look too good. So they had to change this, change that. They didn't go for the back window stripe and things like that. But anyways, they finally went for it, and that's what you see, is this car. And this is the actual car that I built. But when they didn't go for the elephant tusks, Hurst brought it back to me with drawings and said, this is what we want to do. We have to change this and this. So I filled in the holes in the quarter panel and on the deck lid, and we put a 68 spoiler on it instead. Just like probably half of you guys own, that's the car that they bought. So that's how that went. They bought off on that one with a different spoiler. I also had different scoops, if you will, spoilers on the hood vents. They didn't go for that. Okay. The hood scoop that I did was like this. They wanted to change it, so I made the one that you have in your car. That's how that went. So then, that's kind of the history of that, and everybody has your Hurst Olds that I built, and the second version of it, and that's it. So now a gentleman ended up with this car that looks like yours, if you follow me. So he had the car, and he knew what he had, but he didn't know what he had. He knew there was something special about the car, but he just couldn't pinpoint it because everybody kept telling him that was a special Hurst Olds you own. So he really didn't know for sure, so he contacted me and Don about the car that he owned that looked like yours, and it was white pearl. And he asked me about it, and I told him, I said, well, I didn't do a pearl one as a prototype. Well, he says, I think I really have something different, but I want to sell it. And I'm taking it to Mecum. It has already been programmed and everything to be there. So he asked Don and I if we would come to Mecum to, I guess you want to say, if the word is authenticate the car, is it the real deal, what I have? Okay, so Don and I, we went down to here to Indy, to the Mecum auction. And he introduced himself to us, and we talked to him for a while, and the car was sitting there, Pearl and everything, and nice looking car. So I said, well, one thing, open up the trunk. So he opened up the trunk, reached inside the quarter panel. I felt down in there, and I could feel the weld holes that I had welded up so we could make your car, I'll call it, the way you have yours. So I felt those holes and a couple other holes in the deck lid. I looked in the back window, and there was still a little bit of tint on the window down in the very corner of the glass. And I said, yeah, this is the car. Okay. So we made sure that was the car. Gentleman bought it, took it back to their shop, and they took it all apart and restored it back to the original look of the Hurstles with elephant tusks. But in the meantime, when I put it back the second time to look like your car, I'll call it, it was no big deal. It was just a Hurstles. Well, that's when Don Morton, when he worked for Hurst, well, it turned out to be his own company car. You know, it was no big deal, it was just a car. So he was assigned to the car, and he drove it. And he beat the snot out of that car. He raced it, he did everything. And he's going to tell you about that because he has stories. I can't even begin to tell you the stories that Don has, but if he tells you the stories, they're gospel. You can count on it, they're true. But oh no, he beat this car. It was no big deal. It was just a car. You know, if you had a 2019 Challenger now, right? It's just a car. You're going to race it. You're going to do whatever. That's what Don did with the car. So that kind of brought it up to, you know, up to date. And that's about all I can tell you about the car. They did a great job restoring it. It's pearl. The original prototype was not. It was just white. But eventually I ended up doing two, like yours, I'll call it, production Olds's. I did one for Linda and I did one for George Hurst, and both of those cars were pearl. And they had those as their personal cars.
Wow.
So that's about all I can tell you. If there's any questions, I'd be glad to answer anything for you.
Hey Chuck,
Yes.
Tell them the story of how you got one of the hoods that they threw away and you grabbed it and put on the
Well,
scoops? Yeah.
Well, the hood scoops on this, they didn't go for them. They looked good. They were kind of cool, but they didn't like them, so they had to go. When they brought the car back for me to do the second time, just to put the grills back in the back scoops, I took those scoops and I put them in my wife's car. So she had one of Olds's, and she had just a silver Cutlass. I painted the stripes on the side like this. I did hers in charcoal. It was a charcoal instead of black and silver like the 68, and then I put the 68 spoiler on it. So she had a one of silver Cutlasses, if you want to say, with all of the Hurst decorations on it.
And then you just sold it, right?
Yeah, she just drove it. It was the same thing. It was just a car. She just drove it and ended up selling it after how long and traded it on something else.
Oh my
But
God.
that was that.
That's awesome. Thank you.
Pleasure. If there's anything else, let me know or catch me later up, and I'd be glad to talk to you about anything else.
Nice.
So if you've been around at the show, you may have seen these guys walking around, and you may have actually heard a story or two. He promises me he did not already share all the stories he has to tell, and that he will tell us some more. Don was hired in at Hurst Performance in Michigan as a sales manager beginning in 1967. His job was selling shifters to the big three automakers. And during his years at Hurst, the 69 prototype was built. Chuck already brought you up to date on where that is, so I will now ask Don Morton to share one story.
Nice.
Not gonna happen.
I'm so glad you recorded.
After another.
Well, I know that Judy has had a real tough time worrying about, as I've been traveling with you wonderful folks for the last couple days, I've been telling you a lot of good war stories. And she thinks that I've run out of stories. So I figure I'll start with a joke. And if you like it, then we'll continue on with some more stories. But I don't know if you guys, this group is about of an age that should remember the hippie era. And this is a hippie story. It's not a dirty story, it's a hippie story. And out in California, back in the 60s, there is a hippie stumbling down a street in a residential area. And he's kind of tipped over on the magic, wacky, tobacco stuff. But he's in a good mood, and he gets to a corner, a nice picket fence, and he hears some music. So he looks up, and he looks over the fence, and he sees, here's a guy, he's got his chef's hat on, his apron, and he's barbecuing a chicken. And he's roasting it, rolling the manual crank. They didn't have electric ones, or at least this guy didn't. And he's got a boombox, which was very popular in the 60s, up on a shelf, and he's playing some good music. Well, the hippie is really fascinated with this. So he's leaning, he's got his chin on the railing, and he's looking at this, and all of a sudden the guy runs out of barbecue sauce, and the music stops while they do a commercial or two. So the guy turns to go back in and get some more sauce, and the hippie says, "Hey man." The guy turns around, but you hadn't seen him, he's leaning. "Yeah?" He says, "I don't want to bug you, but he says, I just wanted you to know that the music stopped and your monkey's on fire." So anyway, but what can I say? But see, I don't have any more Hurst stories but I guess next should I tell them about the shifter and the Hurst oval? Would they like that? Yeah, I think you would. You won't believe it, but it's a true story. I only tell true stories because in the past there's been some people involved that told other than true stories. But that's another story. Anyway, when we were up at Olds and dealing with the engineers on the 4 speeds and the dual gates, we had an engineer that was really, Olds got a lot done with 1 and 2 engineers, whereas Chevrolet had a whole closet full of them. But anyway,
Nice.
the 2 guys that we dealt with were really good, and they weren't necessarily hot rodders, but they really did anything that would enhance an Oldsmobile they were in favor of. So anyway, we're going to look at a Hurst shifter that they have on a test stand, and they're doing cycle tests on it, 4-speed. And they haven't bought the shifter yet at this point. They're thinking about it. It must have been probably 68 or early 69. Well, as we're walking from these cells, they call them cells in the factory, but they're like little tests, they run a little test in this room, and then the next room has another test. Well, I hear the RPMs going up probably 6,000 RPMs, and I see that they got a Hurst dual gate shifter. And the shifter is in drive, and the transmission is going 5 or 6,000 RPMs. I don't remember the RPMs. Might not have been that high. But anyway, all of a sudden, the shifter automatically, they've got it hooked to a rod, and goes into reverse at that kind of RPMs. Well, I'm fascinated by it. I'm looking at it, I say, oh wait, James, whatever his name was, I don't remember, can't remember my own name, by the way. I said, what is going on in there with that? Because each time it shifts from forward to reverse, the RPMs go up and then it drops into reverse. He said, oh, we're cycle testing that thing on the Turbo 350 to make sure it will withstand so many, I think he said 250 cycles drive to reverse. And I said, wow. I mean, I'm not an engineer, but I thought that's pretty impressive. So on the way home from Lansing, David and I are driving along, and he's driving. He always wanted to drive. He was a bad driver, but he was the boss. And he's we're on I-96, the freeway, and without telling him or warning him, I just reached over. We're doing probably 70, maybe 75. I just yanked it into reverse. Well, what do you think happened? I thought maybe, oh shit, I just blew this one up. The rear wheels instantly go backwards, and if you're not paying a whole lot of attention, at that speed, the car is going to instantly spin out on you. And I let it go just long enough at the rear end, and he started to fight the wheel. I shoved it back in drive. And he said, are you crazy? What in the hell did you do? It scared the hell out of him, of course. So that got to be a standard joke. We used to do it all the time. I had the original prototype with a 517-inch Dale Smith motor, and I loved to demonstrate that. But we had an engineer back, Don Glover could tell you all about him, the nicest little guy you ever met. Literally about my size. His name was Bob Kenny. And he was the transmission engineer involved with the Hurst shifters. And he used to come to Detroit because we, as a sales manager, I was in an enviable position. Because when these engineers started asking all these technical questions, guess what I did? I said, you know, Charlie, Fred, whatever, I'd really like to give you an answer on that, but I'm not an engineer, so I'll have to call our plant in Warminster, and I'll get an engineer out here that can explain all that to you. It was beautiful. I was off the hook, as long as I followed through and got the engineer out there in a reasonable time. So anyway, young Bob Kenny came out to explain something about a dual gate shifter. I don't know what it was. And so we're going to take him, David and I are going to take him up to Lansing to meet with the engineer. He's got a briefcase full of blueprints, you know, shifter blueprints and all that. And the devil made me do it. So I shoved it in reverse. And Bob Kenny was in the rear seat. And of course, when the thing starts to go backward, when the tires start to go backwards, you get instant, makes a lot of smoke. And then it starts to spin out. And David would we got so good at doing it, we could control how far out of you know, straight ahead it was going to get before he pulled it back. If you left it like that, it would have put you in the ditch. But he let it go a little bit longer than normal. He wanted to give Bob Kenny the full ride. And I pulled it back into drive, and I looked at him after we got this accomplished. I looked at his face, was white as a sheet. He says, "You guys are effing nuts." I said, "No, Bob, we're just having fun." He says, "Pull over." Well, we figured maybe he had to take a leak or something. You know, maybe we had scared the you-know-what out of him. So we pulled off on the side. He got out. He said, "Let me out of here." He got out and would not get back in the car. And we begged him. We offered to bribe him. We offered to, "Come on, Bob, you got to go with us. You're expected up at Oldsmobile. I'm not getting in that car with you guys ever again." And we had to go up to Oldsmobile that day and make some kind of a formal excuse that didn't mention shoving the car in reverse. But I will, that's a true story. Used to do it a lot. I remember I did it to my pal George DeLorean, John Z's brother. We were going over on the east side to go boating one night, and traffic was bad on I-94, which it always is. And I waited, it was that stop, go, which the freeways are known for. And so I sat there, I'm driving, and George is in my 69 Hurst Gold. And I waited till the cars ahead moved, 5, 6 cars, so I had enough room. And I floored it, lit it up, and probably was doing 50, and I yanked it into reverse. And George wanted out of the car. And I said, George, these transmissions were made, Oldsmobile runs a 250 cycle on this. And I tell you what, I don't know how many times I did it to that car that I owned. It was a 517. But I did it probably 50 times and never broke a thing.
Wow.
So anyway, that's a true story. And I know Judy is thinking, oh boy, I was worried that he forgot about the stories, and now look at him, he's gone. You had enough yet?
No, we got time for more.
Got time for one more? Well, okay, let's see. How about a Rambler Scrambler story? Everybody thinks that Oldsmobile was they probably were one of our best customers, but we did a lot of stuff for American Motors too. And the original prototype Scrambler, you guys are not going to like this story, but it's true.
It's all right.
From off the showroom floor, the 69 Rambler with a 390 4-speed was the fastest quarter-mile car you could buy. Faster than one of those, because it was such a light car, and it had a good 390 in it with some compression, and so we used to have a lot of fun with those cars too. But I'll tell you I'm going to tell you a Javelin story. I don't know if any of you can remember the story about the Javelin commercial that they made, I think about 68 or 9. There's a guy out cutting the front lawn, looks like a business type person, over in Grosse Pointe, one of the big homes there on the lake. And he's got his mower, and you hear the sound before you see the car, and it's a Javelin coming up the circular drive going vroom, 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 vroom. Well, what the sound, it turned out later, was that of a Top Fuel car idling. So you can imagine the sound. And the kid gets up to the top of the driveway, and he says, he jumps out of the car, and he's heading for, and the old man is listening to this thing, and he stopped mowing the grass, and he says, Junior, what in the world have you done to your mother's car? And Junior says, Dad, it's a great car, I only made it better. And they actually ran that commercial for quite a while. Well, AMC came to us and asked us if we could build a real replica of it. Well, we like challenges. And I said, what do you mean? If we build it with a 671, the engine won't last. What are you going to do with it? Well, we want to drive it and take it around the country to our zones and stuff. I said, well, then how about if we modify a 671 and take the rotors out of it, but leave the front pulleys and the front gears so that it whistles like a regular 671, and we'll hide the 4-barrel inside the plenum. Well, anyway, to make a long story short, we duplicated the car that they used. They built that car. They did the ad using a Hemi dragster fuel car for the sound, and they never had a car. The car that they had was a dummy. So we built a drivable version of it at Hurst. And I had more fun with that car than Carter's got liver pills. I'll tell you. And the thing was, it had a 390 gear, and coming out of the hole, it would put 2 car lengths on anything. Pretty much, I mean, it was a very fast out of the hole, and then it ran out of gas. Am I done now? Are you shutting me down?
Come on, Judy. He's actually interesting. For once, our speaker's interesting.
So anyway, we had been at the first Friday night party, a friend and I,
Holy shit.
and we had been tipping in a bit, you know, and so, but we're in business suits with ties, and we're going up Telegraph Road, which is almost like Woodward Avenue. You're all familiar with Woodward Avenue, but Telegraph has more actual racing on it than Woodward. And about 5 Mile Road with about 3 miles further to go, and I see a Mustang going southbound. We're going north, and I can hear the motor. It's summertime, got the windows down. Somebody's got a lot of motor in that Mustang. So the blower stuck through the hood. So nice on that Javelin. He comes around to see, I should give these guys a shot. Well, he turned out to be a 30-something executive. At least he was in a suit and tie. So he got us at the next light, and I put 2 open on him, and he quit. If he'd have stayed with it, he'd have gone by me so fast I was parked. But it intimidated people when you put a couple quick car lights on them, So anyway, in the course of doing this, I see that the Mustang, I'm slowing down, the Mustang makes a quick U-turn and cuts across a side street. Well, he's a lot smarter than me. He sees a state police car coming southbound and watching all this. Here comes the state police car, and he puts the light on and he pulls us off over. And of course, I told my buddy that was traveling with me, I said, pour the booze out. But that wasn't a real smart move, because at the inside, as the cop explained, he says, this thing smells like yesterday's bar in here. You guys been drinking? So of course I had to fess up and say, well, we had a couple toddies, but we're okay. Well, he says, well, it's your good luck day, because he says, I'm not. Oh, he asked where I lived, and I was within about 3 miles of where I was living at the time. He says, I just stopped you to see what the heck that car was all about. And so all we had to do, and he said, by the way, you're both half drunk, but I'm going to let you go. You seem like you can walk a straight line and all that. He says, if you only got 3 miles to go, then let's go. So I had to open the hood, let him look at it, but I didn't fess up that it was a phony baloney. He was dazzled. So okay, I got Linda here, she wants to talk, and Judy wants to talk, and I've been talking too much.
No, you haven't.
No, I haven't.
No, you haven't.
Not only to thank them, but if you go take a great photo op.
Yeah, it would.
So we get Linda too?
Maybe. You gotta pay. Maybe. However you want to do it. Nice meeting.
Right?
I want to thank you for coming and for entertaining us terrifically.
Right.
And can you get the car in them?
Maybe. Linda's taking a lot of it up. Love you, girl. By far the funnest. Don, I gotta tell you, you're the reason why I keep my hand on the shifter now.
Well, I'll tell you what. I told you I never lie. I've been known to. And yesterday was a true story. If you guys are brave enough to try it.
Mine's not got a GM warranty. Of course I am.
He said that.
No, I understand. I understand. No, Jeff's good. He's got something to say. He'll say it.
You can make at least 50 of them.
Almost done.
Okay, so I also want to thank Linda for sharing time with us.
Well, at least I live long enough to get out of here. My doctor advised me not to come. I ain't supposed to be flying. And I got really sick today, so I apologize. But say prayers, because let me tell you, I have to go to the hospital Monday morning. And they're going to run a bunch of tests, and I'm having some difficulty. So I want to thank my nurse, Sandy Jackson. Thank God I had her with me. And then we got lost. But it's beautiful out here. And most of all, I want to thank Joe for putting this together, Judy and your family. And you guys, I love y'all. But when it hits me, I'm on some new medication and I can't control it. So I got really frightened and a little sick, throwing up and other things. So that's why I kind of tried to check and see if I needed to go to the hospital on the way out here. So that's where we've been. So I made it, and I appreciate y'all and everybody that brings the Hurst cars. You know, they're my children. The cars are my kids, because I never had any. Because who could marry me? I was always going to the events. But that's a joke. I've said no a lot of times. But the passion, what we have, the Hurst people of America, is passion. And my passion has been seeing the love that y'all have for George Hurst. I've been throwing up, so my voice sounds a little weird because I've been in the bathroom for a while here, so I might have a little food poisoning on top of things. So I couldn't have done this for anybody else in the world except the Hurst of America. Thank you so much.